My binge of the MCU has not ever been more long and exhausting until this phase. Even though there's only 7 movies in Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this phase by far has the most amount of content to go through because of the 8 Disney Plus shows. And everyone, I have a confession to make. I didn't actually rewatch every episode of every show for this video. Because listen, I shockingly enough have a life. But I did rewatch enough to remember what I had thought initially about these shows when they came out. For this video, the first half of it will be dedicated towards ranking the 8 Disney Plus shows, everything from WandaVision to She-Hulk, and yes, the What If series is included in this ranking. And then, in the second half of the video, I'm gonna rank the 7 Phase 4 MCU movies, everything from Black Widow to Black Panther 2. Oh, and side note, since Werewolf by Night and the Guardians Holiday Special fall into this weird space where they aren't really a movie or a show, they're not gonna be included in this video. But anyways, we got a lot of content to go through, so let's begin with the Disney Plus shows at number 8. Oh boy, what an odd show. I'll admit, this show starts out fine since it at least makes an attempt at feeling different than other Marvel content. Jen breaking the fourth wall periodically through the show was kinda strange, but was at least able to add on to her character arc. But then the show completely fell apart in the last episode. And I mean that in the most literal sense possible. For those of you who don't care to watch the show, the final episode involves She-Hulk breaking out of the show, wandering through Marvel Studios trying to find Kevin Feige, or I guess Kevin, an AI that is in charge of the events of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and persuading him to change the finale of this show. I don't know, man, this kind of writing just doesn't work in something like the MCU. It also just didn't help that a large majority of this show felt like it was written by Nancy Pelosi herself, or like every old Democrat. Not because the show was woke, but because it felt like every attempt at coming off as feminist in this show was from a pretty out-of-touch perspective. Like having a Ruth Bader Ginsburg bobblehead in the background of the scene to try and say to the audience, "Hey look youngsters, Jen is for women's rights. Isn't that cool and woke and progressive? You should totally watch the show and buy our merchandise." It just kind of felt really pretentious instead of actually trying to make a statement. I don't really have much else of an opinion on the show other than the ending was just so incredibly awful. This show is Marvel's attempt at making a Christmas show, and yeah, it's kinda lame. Nothing that happens in this show is really noteworthy, and I couldn't really tell what the focus was on. Is it Clint trying to get home to his family for Christmas? Is it Clint having to deal with the trauma of being an Avenger? Is it Kate? Is it this mafia group that I guess is reputable enough to be the bad guys of this show? I don't know, man. This show just felt like it was all over the place, and for the most part, it wasn't even that interesting. I'm assuming this show only exists to introduce Kate, which is fine, but I feel like the focus should have been more centered around that. Side note, Rogers the Musical was unironically way better than the show. Most of the show was just completely forgettable. Does anyone really remember what happened in the show? Like, don't get me wrong, I remember liking it when I watched it, but I feel like it really did not take Marvel that long to jump back into the same old routine with the show. Some of the scenes like breaking Zemo out of prison or fighting John Walker were cool, and I guess I don't really have a problem with the story as it was just fine. I just didn't find myself super impressed with something that felt all too comfortable in the Marvel formula, especially right after having watched WandaVision. I'm sure the show purely exists to set up Captain America 4, and honestly, it does a decent job at giving Sam and Bucky a bridge between Avengers Endgame and what's to come, but the show overall is just not that interesting. Moon Knight had a much better beginning than ending. I think the more the show went into the fantasy of the characters instead of just focusing on Mark and Steven and their pasts, the more the show lost me. I really enjoyed all those parts where we got to see the past of the characters and why they are the ones with this condition. I wish the show had focused more on that, because while it was enjoyable to watch the rest of it, it just wasn't really as engaging until we started learning about Steven and Mark's pasts. I gotta say though, Oscar Isaac's performance was pretty spot on, and I love how he was able to make these two characters actually feel different. Overall, this show is really only worth watching for the characters of Mark and Steven, and I hope Oscar Isaac agrees to stay in the MCU for a little longer. So this show is kind of a weird one because it was kind of not at all what I was expecting it to be, and not in a good way. When I had first heard that this show was going to be a thing, my immediate thought was they should make a what if Star-Lord did not attack Thanos during that one scene in Infinity War where they almost defeated Thanos. That was the type of what if scenarios I was expecting, but then the show ended up being more like, what if T'Challa were Star-Lord? What if Agent Carter was Captain America? What if zombies? And don't get me wrong, I had a fun time binging all of these episodes at once, but like, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little bit disappointed with what this show ended up being. I also thought that the ending of the show was a really lame way to try to link everything together. Sometimes you don't need everything to be leading up towards one big collaboration. You can just have one-off episodes to have one-off episodes. Of all the new Marvel shows that tried to introduce a brand new character, this one does it the best. It felt really good to see more slice of life Marvel content where teenagers just exist in a world where superheroes are celebrities. I love how much Kamala's culture and family history were intertwined with her powers and why she has them. I do, however, wish that the show was more focused on what was going on with Kamala and her friends towards the end of the show. I think in the center of all this, Marvel once again made relatable and likable characters first and then a story afterwards, which was helpful for making this a complete and interesting show. I really liked Kamala's character and her Giga Chad crush, and oh, even Bruno. Bro, Disney really needs to stop using that name. I'm looking forward to seeing more of these characters in future movies and shows. WandaVision is the most unique MCU show. It doesn't start out how you would expect a Marvel show to start out. It starts out in this weird sitcom reality where Vision is still alive and Wanda has 2 kids that age 5 years every couple hours. It was really trippy, funny, and engaging while watching this aspect of the show. And even SWORD's attempts at trying to infiltrate Westview were really exciting to watch. They even found a way to bring back some of these side characters that were phenomenal in the movies they originated from. The thing that really weighs the show down is honestly the very last episode and just the Agatha twist in general. I think Agatha is a cool character, but I just wasn't as engaged with her contribution to the plot of the show as I was with Wanda dealing with her grief in this hyper-escapist way. The final episode felt like it took away from this plotline to focus on Agatha, and I don't know, I just didn't really care about it. Still, overall, a pretty awesome show, and I really hope that Marvel continues to do genre blending like this in the future. This show figured out how to expand on so much important stuff in the MCU like time travel and the multiverse, while also giving a new character arc for everyone's favorite villain, Loki. The show begins and he's still the same version of himself that we know and love. He's mischievous, untrustworthy, and serves as great comic relief compared to the other characters. But by the end of the show, he's sort of transformed into someone who genuinely wants to do good and burn down the TVA, because the TVA is not only oppressive to him, but to the very people that he didn't want to trust in the beginning. Having seen all the different variants of himself and what they have become, it's really cool to see how Loki takes that as a reason to serve a higher purpose than just himself. Lightning McQueen, wait no, Morbius, oh crap, no, Mobius as a character shows what happens when someone actually begins to trust Loki, and it's really cool to see that eventually Loki ends up being on the good side by the end. I totally get not wanting to watch any Disney Plus MCU show, but if you're considering watching any of these, this is the one to watch. And right in time for season 2 since that's coming out this summer. Alrighty, I hope you liked my ranking of the Phase 4 shows. We will now be moving on to the movies, but hey, while you're at it, why don't you hit the subscribe button? Because honestly, why not? Wow, oh my god, this is such an epic failure of a movie. And the saddest part is that the story isn't even half bad. This movie just completely falls apart because none of the emotional moments work since the movie didn't properly develop its characters. Okay, let me back it up. So basically, Circe and Ikaris had some sort of relationship centuries ago, and even though they showed multiple flashback scenes, the movie made little to no effort at actually establishing the significance of their relationship. They just figured that showing this one scene that's too hot for YouTube where they get a little bit physical was enough for the audience to assume that they love each other or something, I don't know. But then we eventually find out that in the present, Ikaris was the one responsible for killing one of the other Eternals, Ajax, because they were planning on stopping the emergence of the Celestial on Earth. Why he was willing to kill someone he spent thousands of years with is just covered up by his devotion to the Celestials. But like, it gets even more insane because during the climax of this movie, when he's fighting his fellow Eternals, he stops in his tracks because he realizes he doesn't have it in himself to kill Circe because they're in love or something. Like, dude, on top of there being no development of your relationship with her, why are you a-okay with killing Ajax, but oh no, Circe? Now that's too far. What makes this so sad is that this actually could have worked and been a decent movie had they just developed the characters properly. But because they didn't, we end up getting a movie that has no emotion, filled with characters that I don't care about and I'm probably gonna have to see more of because they're in the MCU. Oh, also, this movie ends with Ikaris dying because he flew too close to the sun. Oh my god, that's so funny. Knee slapper. Haha, Marvel, good one. That's so deep and introspective, bro. God, I hate this movie. This right here is the worst MCU movie to date. Dude, I can't stand Thor anymore. Endgame turned Thor back into a really lame character, and instead of trying to rebuild his character into a better person in this movie, they just made another movie where Thor is annoying and has little to no growth. Like, they tried to make him have some sort of revival by reuniting him with Jane so that he can learn to have love again, but like, does anyone really care about Jane anymore? Like, was their chemistry in the first two movies really that important that it had to be resurrected a decade later? And listen, I really think that Thor teaching the villain in this movie the value of finding love, and in the process also teaching himself it, is a good way to bring his character back. But all of the development that could have been in this movie was rushed because a majority of the runtime was taken up by Thor being a goof. I'm actually kind of shocked that Thor went from being a really annoying character in the first two Thor movies to being a really awesome badass character in the third movie in Infinity War, and now back to being the same really annoying character who is ultimately worthless to the universe at this point. This movie is very middle of the ground for me. I like the characters, and I even like some of the plot near the beginning, but the second that they arrive in Ta Lo, everything just feels so boring and void of the engagement and the creativity that the first half of the movie had. I just feel like they hit a wall because on top of having people invested in the quest that Shang and Katie were going on, the movie had to throw in a bunch of exposition dead in the middle of the movie to explain what this place is and why they're there. And because of that, everything in this movie just felt so much less interesting at that point. The action took a dip, the character moments took a dip, and especially the comedy took a dip. It left me very bored with this movie and just feeling overall not as positively about the first half, even though I still liked the first half. It wasn't an awful movie, but I just really don't think I'm ever gonna rewatch this one. This movie was kind of a weird one because I don't think Disney was really expecting this movie to come out so long after the last Marvel movie. And even though this is the official start of Marvel Phase 4, it really doesn't feel like a movie that belongs in Phase 4. If they had released this after Civil War, this probably would have gotten the attention Disney wanted it to. I mean, this is a movie set in the past about a character who already died in the universe. This literally serves no purpose to the future of the MCU. But all that being said, I actually enjoyed this movie for the most part. I love the dynamic of the family reunion and found the plot to be pretty interesting, even if it serves little to no purpose to the rest of Phase 4. A lot of people were quick to jump onto hating this movie, but for me, I actually really enjoy a large portion of it. It's so freaking cool to see Wanda annihilate everyone, including what is supposed to be the most powerful beings of this timeline with the Darkhold. And even seeing Strange come to terms with the regrets that he has by seeing someone else who's trying to live in a different timeline. The first 3/4 of this movie were really awesome, and I really liked it. But then the movie decided to just completely throw away everything that we knew about the rules of this movie in the end. It honestly felt like they were just making stuff up along the way to advance the plot. Like, oh look, Doctor Strange is gonna use the Darkhold now. Don't mind the fact that Wanda quite literally collided two universes and went on a psycho rampage by using it. And Strange doesn't even question this once when he uses it. I guess you can dreamwalk with your dead body that isn't even that universe's body? Okay. Oh, also, America Chavez randomly knows how to use her powers now, conveniently. And the Darkhold that this movie has been emphasizing is a very big deal? Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore. It's been destroyed in every single universe. Like, dude, the end of this movie is a hot mess. And I feel like most of this movie was kind of a hot mess too, but the first half was at least a good hot mess because the rules were not caving in on themselves. Nonetheless, it is still fun to watch, and for me at least is definitely a highlight for Phase 4. Oh my god, why does he have a third eye now? Wow, what a pleasant surprise to put at the end of Phase 4. This movie works so well because the movie is centered around the mourning of T'Challa. Shuri, on top of having to deal with going on without an older brother, has to take on a brand new large position that she herself isn't even sure that she can handle. The film is always aware of T'Challa, and because of it, it almost feels like he is with us and the characters as they get through this difficult period in their lives. The fish people plot was kind of a weird thing to introduce in this movie, but it at least allowed for there to be a plot that guided Shuri through her stages of grief, where she eventually came to a peaceful conclusion that ends with her sparing Namor's life and burning her funeral robe. The end credits fading in over the flames of the fire made this entire film just feel so much more symbolic. In a phase that was filled with very hit or miss movies, it felt so good to watch something that felt like a direct hit right at the end of the phase. It wasn't a crazy multiverse film, it wasn't something that feels like it's gonna have a large impact on the rest of the MCU, it was just a really good movie. Dang, they really did it. They made the Spider-Man movie that everyone wanted. Literally any type of Spider-Man fan can find something that resonates with them because it is able to encapsulate all of the best things about the character throughout the decades. This movie essentially brings every character together as a way of further developing Tom Holland Peter Parker as a person. His arc began in the first movie with trying to find his identity with all of Tony Stark's technology. It continued in Far From Home as he tried to figure out who he is without Tony. And now in this movie, he comes to the realization that he needs to make genuine sacrifices if he wants to protect the people he loves. Peter having to grapple with the fact that May's death was partly his fault for directly defying Strange's orders, but also wanting to keep the part of him that wants to help and save people is such an emotionally scarring thing for his character to go through. This movie is not just the cliche multiverse brain mush movie that a lot of people are claiming it is. This movie has the most emotion that the MCU has seen since Infinity War, and I mean that wholeheartedly. I guess the only thing to really criticize this movie about is Peter Parker being wiped from everyone's memories is an insanely confusing thing to wrap your brain around. Sure, it's easy to understand that the average New Yorker who doesn't know Peter can just forget about him, but like, what about MJ or Ned? J. Jonah Jameson post-memory wipe acknowledges that the events of the Statue of Liberty happened, and MJ even still has a bandage from the events. Do they just like not remember why they were at the Statue of Liberty or like what was going on? Do they have a close relationship with Spider-Man but not know who he is at all? Especially with Happy, who has known that Peter is Spider-Man for the longest. How does he know Aunt May through Spider-Man but not know how he knows Aunt May through Spider-Man? I don't know, man. I feel like the more I think about it, the more it just confuses me. Maybe Spider-Man 4 will explain it better or something. I don't know. Either way, this was definitely the best movie from Phase 4, but still only the second best multiverse related Spider-Man movie, and maybe even the third most considering that Spider-Verse 2 is coming out soon. I did it. I am free from the long and exhausting binge of the MCU. I have a list on Letterboxd that combines all of my phase rankings into one giant MCU films ranked list. And I've even got the first Phase 5 movie thrown in there. Whenever a new MCU movie gets released, I'm gonna add it to this list, and I'll even do a mini review of the movie individually on there. So go check out my Letterboxd if you haven't yet. And in the meantime, check out my 3 previous MCU phase videos, and maybe even my Star Wars ranked video. Subscribe to my channel, and I'll see ya in Radiator Springs.